pray. O God, who continues to speak, quiet all the other voices within us but yours, that we may truly hear your word with our ears and with our hearts, and then respond with our lives. Amen. Reading from the 17th chapter of the Gospel according to Matthew. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And Jesus was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them. And from the cloud a voice said, "This is my son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This is such an otherworldly kind of story. Honestly, it would not be strange to see it on the cover of National Enquirer while waiting at the checkout line at the grocery store, or a display in Ripley's Believe It or Not museum. Perhaps this is the kind of story that takes some thinking outside of the box to tackle it. Perhaps some holy imagination, if you will. For instance, what if Peter had kept a journal? I wonder what he might have written. It's a quiet evening here by the Sea of Galilee. Calm breeze, still water. It's my favorite time of day. The setting sun is filling the sky with beautiful light and colors. But this light pales in comparison to the light I saw a couple of days ago. I'm not even sure how to put it all into words. Jesus had taken me, along with James and John, up the mountain with him, leaving the crowd and the rest of the disciples behind. And there we were, gazing quietly out at the vista, when all of a sudden Jesus was transfigured right in front of us. Really. He was transfigured. It was the most amazing metamorphosis. The light. Jesus' face shone like the sun itself. His clothes were the most dazzling white I have ever seen. I stood there motionless, I'm sure with my mouth wide open. And then, just like that, Moses and Elijah were standing there talking with Jesus. I mean, they didn't have name tags on, but it was so obvious. Moses, the greatest leader the Israelites had ever known, was all the time encountering God up on a mountain. And Elijah was the greatest of the prophets. As the story goes, he didn't die, but was taken up to heaven in a whirlwind. Jesus, Moses, and Elijah, what a threesome. And James and John and I were there to see them. I wanted to make the most of that wondrous, radiant moment. I mean, who wouldn't? I know I was babbling, but I suggested to Jesus that I make a booth for each one of them. But before I even finished my sentence, another indescribable thing happened. This bright cloud engulfed us, this thick, mysterious kind of luminescent fog. I couldn't see anyone, not even James and John right beside me. And about the same time as the cloud descended, a voice from out of nowhere said, "This is my son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." I was so startled and scared. My knees buckled, and I fell flat on my face. I heard James and John fall too, and I put my arms up over my head to protect myself. And then I felt a touch on my forearm. I opened my eyes. It was Jesus, who said in that reassuring voice of his, "Get up, don't be afraid." So I jumped up and I looked around. Nothing. No cloud, no voice, no Moses, no Elijah, no bright light, nothing. Just James and John and Jesus, his clothes no longer dazzling. Everything was all like it had been before. But it was different. It was bizarre, baffling. I was speechless for once. I looked at James and John. They looked at me. We all looked at Jesus. I wanted to ask, what just happened? But Jesus was already moving toward the trail that led back down the mountain. Before I could ask my question, Jesus stopped and turned to the three of us. He said, "Don't tell anyone about this vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." I don't think any of us said 2 words the rest of the way back down. And of course, as soon as we got to the bottom, there they were, this crowd of people waiting to see Jesus so he could heal them. Back to the grit and the grind. So it's been a couple of days since that vision, or whatever it was, on the mountaintop. I can't get it out of my head. James and John and I have whispered about it to each other, but we haven't had the time or the space to really talk in depth. There's so much to process, and not just about that experience. I mean, looking back in this journal, I'm reminded of the time Jesus fed literally thousands of people with only a couple of fish and a few loaves of bread. The other disciples and I were the ones handing out the food, and it was crazy how the fish and the bread just kept coming. And there was that time out in the boat. Jesus had sent us ahead while he dismissed the crowds and had some time to pray. We battled a stiff wind all night and into the early morning. And just as the sun rose, there he was. There he came, walking on the water toward us. We thought he was a ghost until he spoke to us. And for some unknown reason, who knows why, I generally talk before I think. I wanted to make sure it was him. I yelled out and said to him, "Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come ahead." So I climbed out of the boat and I walked on the water toward him. I, Simon Peter, walked on top of the water. Well, at least a couple of steps. I got distracted by the wind and the waves and started to sink, but Jesus caught me and pulled me up. I think he was halfway chuckling when he asked me why I had doubted. We in the boat knew that morning that he truly is the Son of God. And it wasn't long after that, when we were in Caesarea Philippi, that Jesus asked us who people say that he is. One of my companions said that some people think he's John the Baptist. Some think he's Elijah. I know he's not Elijah because I saw Elijah up on the mountain. Some think he's Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. Then Jesus asked us directly, "Who do you say that I am?" I spoke up and said, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." He looked right at me and said, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. Flesh and blood have not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven." He went on to say something about my name being Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it, and the keys of the kingdom of heaven will be mine, and whatever I loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And then he sternly told us not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. That was fine with me because I didn't have much of a clue about what he was saying. How could I tell anyone else? And if all of that isn't confusing enough, here's the weirdest part. Jesus told us he's going to Jerusalem and will suffer at the hands of the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed of all things. I took him aside. "God forbid it, Lord. This must never happen to you." And just like that, after saying earlier that I was blessed, he told me, "Get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me, for you're setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." I have to say, it stung. And he told us, "If you want to become my followers, deny yourselves, take up your cross, and follow me. Those who want to save their lives will lose them. Those who lose their lives for my sake will find them." What the heck does that mean? It's all confusing. I mean, one minute Jesus is healing people and walking on water, and the next minute he's talking about being killed. I don't get it. And I don't have a good feeling about all of this. I mean, the religious leaders are not happy with him or with us. He definitely ruffles their feathers. I think they're threatened by him. But would they really kill him? Would they kill us? I keep thinking back to that mountain. What did it mean? Had I put my foot in my mouth yet again? Was I wrong to offer to build booths for Jesus and Moses and Elijah? True, neither Jesus nor the voice in the cloud took me up on that offer, but they didn't scold me either. I don't know what it all means. I know it's easy to get bogged down in the details, but I am clear about this. I saw the light. Heaven and earth came together for a moment. I saw a carpenter from Nazareth transformed into the Son of God, the human and the holy, one and the same. And I can still hear the voice saying, "Listen to him. Listen to him." I'm doing my best. And I can still remember the moment when Jesus touched me and said, "Get up, don't be afraid." Jesus touched me. When all of that majestic brilliance had faded, Jesus was still there with that reassuring touch. I can't explain that mountaintop experience, but I know it changes everything. And somehow, I think that experience in particular, along with all these other events, are preparing us for something big that's coming. Our days are filled to overflowing with people in need, with hurts and hungers and anxieties. It's really hard when I'm in the middle of that mass of humanity to even remember all that Jesus has said, much less understand it. I have a ton of questions. But I also have that mountaintop vision. It is so clear and so compelling when I stop long enough to remember it. The human and the holy, one and the same. I truly believe, I have to believe, that whatever comes next, whatever it is, even if it's as bad as Jesus says it's going to be, somehow it'll be okay. Somehow it'll be okay. Got to go for now. To be continued.